Picture, if you will, a small but growing city in the South with a newspaper that has been on the track of fraud and racketeering in its own backyard. From 1984 to 1987, this paper had published story after story of possible fraud and duping those easily manipulated, the elderly and the sick, those that only had TVs as their only source of information and entertainment, those that were scared of the world evolving around them. The question has to be asked, what kind of person would do such a thing? Why it was a preacher and his wife on TV from 1974 until 1987, Jim and Tammy Bakker defrauded millions of dollars from people, their members. As the Charlotte Observer watched on for years, they were also the thorn in the side of the PTL Club, which gave this small city paper the chance to win the Pulitzer Prize, the gold medal for public service in the newspaper journalism's highest honor. Less than a year later, another high-profile TV preacher, a televangelist, if you will, was caught up in another sex scandal, which is one of the links that was the downfall of Jim Bakker. And that other preacher, that was none other than the cousin of Jerry Lee Lewis himself, Jimmy Swaggart. Fast forward to today, while both Swaggart and Bakker are still on TV, or back on television. I mean, really? But okay. There's a new group of preachers with even more wealth. And how is it okay for a man of God to live like kings? Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, Robert Tillotson all preach of the prosperity doctrine. Today we are going to look into that and how these teachings line up actually with the teachings of the Bible, as well as how they affect the politics of the day. So today here at Heresy and Hearsay, we'll be discussing the prosperity doctrine. Welcome to Heresy and Hearsay, a political podcast reclaiming faith in the political discussions. I'm Reverend Barney, and you can follow me on Twitter at SethRothII. You can follow the show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and any podcast catcher. Just look for Heresy and Hearsay. Please like, share, follow, subscribe, and do all of that. Also, give us a review, and that helps others find us. I will be doing this again solo today, and hopefully next week I will have my partner back. But you can always find September and my better half of the podcast on Twitch and Twitter at 9of12. That's at NINEOF12. And you can hear her on the Geek Grills and Trust Your Cape podcast. Heresy and Hearsay also has a Patreon site that you can find at patreon.com/heresy and hearsay. You can help support us there with just $2 a month. We also have a website of heresyandhearsay.com where you can catch up on our older podcasts. You can also help contribute this show with bits in Twitch, and also subscribe free if you have Amazon Prime. Should be back on Twitch next week. September has, before we dive into tonight's, or today, I'm recording this at night. So forgive me if I say tonight a couple of times, but we will be, should be back on Twitch next week. September posted that her voice is getting stronger. She will have to still be careful for a little while. Voice surgery does take some time to heal without causing scarring, which it negates the whole reason for the surgery in the first place. So she should be back next week. And next week, I do also want to say that we'll be talking about the poor and rich divide and discussing what the Bible thinks about that. Tonight, we're going to kind of, like last week is leading in this week, and the next week's show, it'll be that. And also, next week's show, we'll also discuss how some of the Democratic candidates are talking about that wealth divide and what the debates showcased as far as that's concerned. We're not going to do a full debate breakdown on every debate until we get less than 20, because that's a really large number of people to follow. I would like to get more substantive stuff coming up, and that will probably be the fall, but we will touch on some of the things they spoke about in these debates. So there'll be some links and stuff that will be in this descriptions, things that are talked about in the Bible and things like that. But what I want to talk about, and I grew up around the Charlotte area. I knew of the PTL Club because it's just down the street, or it was. It was, in fact, across the highway. We have an interstate that went basically between a theme park, an amusement park, has passed hands a couple of times, but it's still very active. An amusement park here. It's on the South Carolina-North Carolina border. Those who know it, it's called Carowinds. And you can actually walk on the border. It's one of the cool things about it. But Carowinds is a theme park, family-friendly theme park. It used to have, when I was a kid, Hanna-Barbera characters. I haven't been in years. I don't know what they have these days. I know they have some really rad-looking roller coasters, and if I was thinner and shorter, I would probably get on them. But I am not. And so it breaks my heart because I am a coaster person. But across the, I know it's going to be a tangent thing. I apologize. But across the interstate I-77 was in South Carolina at that point, and it was the PTL Club and Heritage USA, which was their big. It was going to be a family theme park and a family run, family oriented and very friendly and very, it was going to be very Christian, and it was going to be not, Hanna-Barbera, who, all that kind of stuff. It was going to be very family friendly. And they'd sell memberships. And for $1,000 lifetime membership, you would be able to get a hotel room for 3 nights. Problem was, they only built one hotel. They built millions of dollars out of people, to build this thing. But there was a progression. Jim Baker is back on television, by the way. He is now sailing basically kitty litter sized giant containers of food that's supposed to last up to 30 years. I don't even think MREs last 30 years. But, for survivalists and basically preppers. So he's on the same bilk as Alec Jones when it comes to selling that kind of stuff. But he's back in the business, and he's back in the business of lying to people about everything. You think spending years in jail would have straightened him up. Jimmy Swaggart, though he's not as prominent, he is still him and Pat Robinson in the 700 Club. And I want to differentiate a couple of things. The early televangelists, they would want to build churches, or they would want to build resorts, or we got the Liberty University out of this and everything. And the Crystal Cathedral was one of those that was big. On another tangent, I'm a Highlander fan. I always wanted to see a quick, though I know it's holy ground for those who know the mythos of Highlander. I always wanted to kind of see what would happen if there was like a quickening in because I think, it's the Crystal Cathedral. It's supposed to be a lot of glass and everything, and it's very pretty and everything else. But there's the old guard of televangelists who raise money And when they raise money, it's to build, supposedly to build things. Of course, the price of building something and what they actually receive are very much different. And that's one of the reasons why Jim Bakker went to jail, was because of the fact that they got all this money to build this luxury resort, but they only built one hotel, and yet where did all the other money go? That's where the fraud came in, or part of the fraud, anyways. But they would build these kind of things, but again, they would skim money off of the top for themselves, and they lived like millionaires. Don't get me wrong, they did. But there was supposed to be something substantial come out of it. Not always. A famous story is Oral Roberts preaching about how if he didn't raise a certain amount of money, God was going to take him to heaven, and he had to keep changing the dates of when God was going to take him to heaven, because he kept falling short of his goal. Now, I will be focusing on the prosperity doctrine in a few moments, but I want to give a backstory and an understanding. Growing up in that kind of area and this kind of saturation, because half my family was very conservative Christian. The other half was Christian, but they were less that conservative. And they didn't like, and one half, listen to these kind of guys, and these were their people they would follow and stuff like that. And the other half, they would listen, but, they wouldn't like send money and stuff like that. And so it was kind of, so I lived in a dichotomy, but I grew up in this society or in this culture of televangelists and radio preachers and television preachers. So growing up into that, I discovered very early on, because I was a child in 1987, growing into my teenage years, how deep that all went, and how just wrong it was that a man of God would do that, would take money from people who are suffering and stuff like that, and then enrich themselves, especially with the doctrine I was being taught, and somewhat in church, that we're supposed to take care of each other, we're supposed to love each other. God said, Jesus said, sell everything and follow me. And then we have millionaire preachers. So this has always been there, and I've always had a narc for it. I've always watched for it. I've always needed to make sure that, or I kept in touch with it to see what was going on. Jimmy Swaggart and Pat Robinson, all of them, pardon me. And, there were famous preachers that I sort of idolized. I did at the time more than I do now, because I've grown older, and as I've grown older, more stories have come out and things like that. All right, maybe I should go in for something about my throat. Anyways, so that's one of those situations there. As I've always been reticently understanding and reticent of these kind of people. But this new doctrine, it's not completely new, but it's been starting to show itself a lot more and being talked about in the news. About 1 or 2 years ago, John Oliver talked about televangelists and even started a church, but he used it talking about taxes and how churches aren't taxed. So, you know, but it was also about but he also talked about the prosperity doctrine, and the two people he brought up, one of them, both of them I mentioned. One was Robert Tillotson, T.I. Sorry, his last name is spelled Tilton, and he's got a TV show called Success in Life, which had it peaked in 1991 with 235 million markets, and brought in nearly 80 million a year. There has been some, and here's the thing, he's been under investigation a lot. People have watched him a lot, his ministry and fundraising, undercover investigations. Primetime Live did a documentary on him. Government got involved. He was sued for fraud, stuff like that. And then back in 1996, he came back with it, and it hit the airways. It wasn't nearly as popular, but he would buy airtime in independent stations, primarily serving inner city areas. This new version, basically what he would do is he started doing the prosperity doctrine, talking about it and everything else. So, and that's something that John Oliver discussed. The other one is that I mentioned in this was Kenneth Copeland, and there are others. I want to focus on Copeland and Osteen for two reasons, and there's going to be an article about some of the scandals that some of these televangelists have been through. Not like the big sex scandals or anything. This is all about money. Copeland, in an interview with another prominent televangelist, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head, and I apologize, spoke about how he had to get a private jet to fly on because he could not fly commercial, because people would always come up and ask him for prayers, or basically doing what anyone who is a religious leader would expect happen to them if they're in public. Asking to pray for them, asking to pray with them, wanting to discuss, Bible or whatever, important things. Now, don't get me wrong. These are people, they are famous people, and I do advocate strongly that if you see a famous person, like out to dinner or whatever else, great, you see them, let them have time with their family and stuff like that. I get that. I do. But on the same thing, not only are you a famous person, but you're a famous person who claims to be a shepherd for God. All right. Part of your gig as a shepherd of God is to tend his flock. And if his flock comes to you and asks you questions, or wants you to pray with them or pray for them, that's part of your job. I know it's not part of their job. Their job is to get on TV, ask you to send them money, and so that they can have 3 or 4 private planes, live in a mansion, as a parsonage. A parsonage that, it's a $6 something million mansion. and sell oils and all this kind of stuff. No, not at all. This is not what you do. This is not how you deal with things. As a person of God, whether you're a Buddhist, whether you're, whatever your faith is, if your faith is, if the Dalai Lama was to be on your flight, more than likely he's flying first class because a couple of reasons, safety reasons, stuff like that, but also because he himself may not have a whole lot of money, but people who are helping him do, and they would like him to be comfortable, and he's an older gentleman, though he probably doesn't need to say that a woman needs to be attractive to be the next Dalai Lama. That's another story. However, if someone of Buddhist faith comes up to the Dalai Lama and asks for a blessing or asks for some guidance or something like that, it's his gig, and that's what he does. If the Pope is on a plane, that is a commercial plane, and Catholic people come up to him and ask to pray or a blessing or whatever the case may be, that's what he's supposed to do. Billy Graham, if he got on a plane, and people asked to pray, he would pray with them. He would, in fact, probably get up and pray with if the entire plane wanted to pray. So it's your job. So, but if you are going to claim that you need a private jet to do God's work because you can't focus, fine. I will give you a benefit of a doubt on that condition. That you need to study, that you need to be in proper prayer before you go and speak to millions of people who have probably, I don't know if they pay, depending on the individuals, it was not so much you'd pray, but there would be a love offering before you could get in the door. And I've been to a couple of those things, and those love offerings are normally $20 right about, $10 to $20 depending. I put in $1. They can't say no, but I also wasn't shown the best seat of the house. That's also true. So, money got you a better seat closer to the stage. If you understand, if you drop a C note in, you're probably going to get a little bit closer than if you drop $1, which was what I was seeing there. And it wasn't uncommon. It's not the first one. I didn't go to just one. There were several like that, where there's a love offering. But you have to focus. You have to be able to preach to the masses. Whatever. I can understand that to some degree. One airplane is really good. I can get that. It doesn't have to be. Oh wait, he has some of the most expensive private jets, and not just one. He has 5, and it's not just. And this is something that has been talked about in the news articles and stuff like that. It's not just for ministry work. He uses these planes to go for family vacations. Or vacations, or whatever the case may be. So there's a dichotomy, there's a disconnect there. He is telling you that, he needs this so that he can prepare for preaching God's word, but yet he is not using that genuinely. He is using it for other means, and he's living a rich lifestyle. So what is the prosperity doctrine? I haven't gotten into that. What is the prosperity doctrine? Prosperity doctrine, boiled down to its basic essence, is that God, the reason why people are wealthy and the reason why people are rich is because God has blessed them because they are more holy than you are. They are more holy. They are more in tune with God's love. And therefore they are rich or they are powerful. basically, and this is big on Protestant Christians, that basically hold, and I'm reading this from Wikipedia, so, and Wikipedia is not a bad place to get this stuff, but it's, holds that financial blessings and physical well-being are always the will of God for them, and faith, positive speech, and donations to religious causes increases one's material wealth. I want you to think about this for a second. Even if you don't know the Bible well, a lot of people can quote certain stories or know certain stories, especially of Jesus' teaching. Especially, even if you're not a religious person, even if you do not believe in God as the creator of the universe, or believe Jesus is God's only son. There are people, it's in our zeitgeist, it's in our inheritance, our DNA, if you will. Not the DNA, but in the cultural DNA, if you will. Stories about Sermon on the Mount, about the Good Samaritan, about turning over the tables in the temple, about people who get their blessings on earth versus people who get their blessings in heaven. It's the praying in public versus the praying in your closet stories. When you give money to a charity, when I give money to a charity, I don't announce that what charities I give money to, who I give money to, how much I give money to, because it's a charitable donation. It's what I'm giving to a society, to a group of people that I believe are doing good work in one way or the other. I will mention one because it's a local one and it deserves to be mentioned, and that's the Holy Angels. When I have the ability to give them money, I do give them money. Holy Angels is a very it's ran by a group by the Catholic Church, and it's basically a place where those who have learning disabilities or mental disabilities or whatever that could not function in society. This is a place where they can go, and it's a hospital for them. It's so beautiful and tragic all at the same time. And I honestly believe, is doing the Lord's work. They need all the support they can get, from both financially, and if you can handle it, it's rewarding. But it's kind of like working in a shelter, especially if it's a kill shelter. It's rewarding, but it's also painful. I'm not saying that they kill these kids. I'm just saying there are tragedies that happen because their life expectancies are much lower. But it's a rewarding and beautiful work, but it's one that takes a lot of inner steel to be able to handle it and digest it and still love it. But they deserve that. They deserve that kind of attention. But I typically don't say how much or who I give money to or whatever. These are my causes. These are the people that I believe are doing good work. Because I believe, and I have read, the Bible states this, that our rewards are not earthly rewards, but rewards in heaven. So the prosperity doctrine is not correct when it comes to what the Bible says. The Bible says that your rewards are not here on earth. Your rewards are in heaven. That person praying out in the street in front of everybody so that they can be seen, that is their rewards. They are getting their rewards now. They will not get rewards in heaven. And I was taught that it is more important to build up your treasures in heaven than your treasures here on earth. Yet this prosperity doctrine, and this is why it irks me and upsets me as a Christian, as a person of faith, as someone who is a theologian and someone who puts the name Reverend in front of his name. I never want to be extremely wealthy. I have discussed this multiple times. If I was to ever win the lottery, I would do a reverse tithing system. Basically, I would keep 20% for myself, which would probably also go to friends and family, you know, but I would also give 80 to 90% to charities, you know, because I don't need that kind of money. I need money to be happy. I need money to, you know, to pay bills and stuff. I don't need money to make me happy. It would help. I would use it to build this up, the podcast and everything. But for the most part, I want to do that because I want to reach more people. And I want to help people understand the faith that they claim, you know, or how faith is affecting politics. I don't want to, you know, I'm not trying to convert people to my faith. I'm trying to, the reason I started this was because I wanted to help those of my faith understand their faith better and how it's being used to manipulate them in wrong ways. I also wanted to use this podcast so that with those people who aren't believers per se, but are speaking to believers on the other side, are able to use their own language to help them understand and to get their point across without belittling them. But part of that discussion is this prosperity doctrine, because it is used in a political way as well, in an insidious way, in very insidious ways. The big insidious ways that it is used, that is discussed, that it's talked about, is how people like Donald Trump, for example, because he's so rich and powerful, it's because God has put blessings on him. I want to scream at the top of my lungs on top of a large building. What the fuck? Really? No, really. You're saying Donald Trump has been married 3 times, cheated on his wives, had multiple affairs with women, you know, of questionable descent, sexual assault. People have come up with accused of sexual assault. Don't want to get sued. Accused of sexual assault. There's an accusatory thing that he may have even been part of some of Epstein's orgies. There's a couple of stories out there about that as well. And we know what Epstein was into. So, you know, again, accused. There is no proof, and I am not claiming this to be the case. Okay. But we do know about, you know, the affairs. We do know about you know, the prostitutes. We do know, you know, married 3 times. You know, we do know all of this stuff. We do, you know, all of this. And he lies a lot. Not just a little, a lot. I mean, it's, you know, I can't imagine being a fact checker in this stage. You know, fact checkers, they would had to check facts occasionally and everything else, but for the most part, it was only big speeches and stuff they had to worry about. They are busy every day fact checking the littlest words that come out of his mouth. You know how I feel? I can tell when Trump's lying, when his lips are flapping. He lies a lot. And I am not a great Christian. Do not get me wrong. I am not. I try every day about my judgmental nature. I try every day to be a better person and a better human being. I do try. I am not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But to believe that people like Donald Trump or people like Rupert Murdoch or whoever, the reason they're so powerful and so, or the Waltons, oh my gosh, the Waltons, that they are so powerful and they are so thought of in a grandiose way, is because God has blessed them, and therefore we should listen to them because God has blessed them with this financial wealth, with this financial power. It makes you angry. It makes me angry. If you have read anything of the Bible, it says it is, and I said this last week, I'll say it this week, and I'll probably say it every time money, politics, and this kind of stuff comes up. It is easier for a camel to be pushed through the sewing eye of a needle, because I do believe that translation, than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. Camels are huge animals. They're also mean, and they are not going to like trying to be pushed in through a needle. Easier for that than for a rich man to get in heaven. That being said, when it's used that way, when it's spoken that way, when it's talked about that way, when it is mentioned that there are, that the reason why X has this kind of money and power, especially if it's someone who claims to be a shepherd for God, who claims to be a reverend or a pastor and has all this money. The reason they have all this money is because God has blessed them. It flies in the face of everything that the Bible has talked about. The Old Testament, Isaiah is full of it especially, but the Old Testament talks about more than one occasion about the rich and the powerful taking advantage of the poor. And this is why God is bringing down a wrath on them again. Israel was notorious for taking for this kind of stuff. That's why God kept getting angry at them and having their people, killed by outside foreigners. But it goes more than that. Joel Osteen, megachurch. Another thing that drives me nuts is megachurches. Fine. You've got a large congregation. I don't know how you pulled that off, but great. There are a couple sort of mega churches around here. I am not a fan of them because that could be used for so much better work for God. If you have that many followers, put it out on TV. The money it's probably cheaper than running a building. Put it out on TV. Let your followers watch that way. Do you need thousands of people every Sunday in attendance? I think it's an ego stroke. If I was to walk up on stage and thousands of people were to shout my name and cheer for me and clap for me, that's a huge ego stroke. I'm sorry. That's just huge. So to think that, this is not a huge ego stroke as part of it really confounds me. Really, really confounds me of how that could be. So that being said, that being discussed, that being talked about, Joel Osteen, last year there was a hurricane down in Houston, and people talked about, some of the shelters weren't being able to gotten to things of this nature. And people talked about, Joel Osteen has this huge church. He's a Christian. He should probably open up his church doors. And as it's been reported, notification went out, oh, we can't do that. The place is flooded, stuff like that. People walked up to the door of his church. There may have been a couple of inches of rain falling. The drainage system was working perfectly in that parking lot and perfectly at that church. The church itself was dry inside. They could see there was no damage, nothing whatsoever. He refused to open up his church to those who needed shelter. His church. Now, again, I've explained this, and I'll say it again. The church that I used to go to, when Hurricane Katrina came up, refugees went as far and wide, and some even came to North Carolina. And there was a family that came to North Carolina, and the church, and its goodness and wisdom, gave, the preacher said, you know what, I can find, I will get a place to stay. I'll rent we'll rent an apartment or something. And they they were between preachers at the time, so they didn't have one, so it actually worked out even better. Let them use the cars, the church vehicle, the church car, so that they could find jobs and do all the appointments they needed to do with FEMA and the Red Cross and stuff like that, and let them use the parsonage until they got on their feet. I think that was extremely important and extremely powerful, and I think that's something that churches need to do. I can't see Copeland ever giving up his $1 million mansion because of refugees, or because of a natural disaster around his church. I don't see that ever happening. But when you look at this and you compare it to things that are going on with the Bible and what the Bible talks about, one of the things that is brought up, one of the things that is mentioned in the Bible is how Jesus talked to the Pharisees. And this particular is Matthew chapter 23. You can read the entire chapter, because the entire chapter basically goes through, some of these things that they do. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, because there's an article that will be in the show notes as well, is this passage, and this is verse 6 of chapter 23 of Matthew. And they love the places of honor at banquets, the seat of honor and synagogues, greetings in the marketplace, and salutations of rabbi. They love being noticed. They love being treated well. They love being all of this. There's an article that I'm going to be posting, and it was by the nephew of Benny Hinn. For those who don't know the name, you may have seen some of the viral videos that went out of this silver-haired preacher in a nice suit waving his coat, and people just falling down all over the place. Or, him just throwing his hands up, and the entire crowds of people just passing out from the power of God in his hands. Healing people in the audience, touching people and healing them. And he talks about how he used to believe in the prosperity doctrine, and used to believe in how God would bless us because we are so godly. And one of the things he brought up, he brings up 3 points of why this was so indoctrinating and so powerful, and why he doesn't believe it anymore, because it's not true. First is money, because money is great. Don't get me wrong. If I had $1 million, I could do a lot of good in the world, but I could also be not broke. And that's always a good thing. Most people, and I want to back up a little bit before I get into too much more. Most people aren't looking to be rich, to be mega rich. Most people just don't want to have to worry about bills. I know that's my case. So, to be mega rich, I know what it can do. The old quote is, power corrupts absolutely. It's or the love of money is the root of people used to say money was the root of all evil. It's not. Money has its purpose. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. The more money you get, the more you want. That's why we had back in 2003, 2004, we had so many people going down. Enron, Delphi, people like that. And then when the crash happened all these bankers and all the money that all the money that these CEOs were using, and you're seeing it now with gaming companies. You're seeing all this love of money destroying something, destroying things, because it destroys, because you get so greedy and you want so much more, because it becomes almost like a drug that you have to have more of that money and more of that money and more of that money, because you can't get that high that you got when you hit that first $1 million, or when you hit that first line of cocaine, or whatever the case may be, because it's a drug. Once you hit that first million or whatever, some people, because they strive so hard for it, it's like they can't hit that high again of when they hit that first rich part. And so they keep going and they keep trying and they keep wanting to get that high, chasing that high. And that is what destroys so much. That's what destroyed the banking industry in 2008. That's what's destroying the gaming industry now. That's what destroyed, companies back in 2004 and 2005. It's what destroyed the SNL, back in the late 90s or mid 90s. It's all these kind of things, because it's more power, more money. I have to get it. I have to catch it. So it's the money, but it's also, money brings power. You've seen that so many times. All you have to do is look at our judiciary system and look how people of wealth can get away, especially people of a certain color, can get away with a lot more than people who are not of means. That's a lot of power. And then you can also start using that money to gain political power and stuff like that. Why do you think people like the Koch brothers and the Mercers and all of that give so much money? Because that's part of the power structure. They're able to give money. Religious people can give money too. Religious people have power at that point. They have power over people's souls. All you have to do is look at history and the Catholic Church, and how the Catholic Church used, especially the threat of being excommunicated from the church to cow kings and to cow the populace. There's more than one occasion where a pope says, I am going to excommunicate this entire country, or this entire area, or this entire faction. And it wasn't the kings that, or the leaders of those factions that cared. It was the small folk, as they're called in Game of Thrones. But, it was the peasantry. It was the common people that feared that. And it's that way today. There are so many legions of followers of these religious individuals who hang on their every word, who listen to what they say, and therefore they can sway these people, to vote a certain way. Jimmy Swaggart and them started the moral majority. Started was really starting that catalyst back in Nixon, and then especially in Reagan's time, where the religious figures were extremely important to getting people out to vote, and the reverse is starting to come true, especially in certain certain churches, that they're starting to get out their members to vote on the Democratic side. But it's still an outweighing number. And the thing is that a lot of these churches, they are people that are middle class at best, but they also cater to the poor. The poor hear this, and the poor want to be rich, and they believe they can be rich because they give every dime that they have to this preacher, to seed their faith by giving to this preacher. This preacher is going to pray on this envelope, and this envelope is going to be blessed, and the next thing you know, that person is going to become wealthy, because they keep seeding, and it's part of it's called seeding faith. But it's seeding material faith. The more money you give, the more blessings will be bestowed on you, because I will pray over your letters, and I will pray over the money that you've given me, and you will receive it back tenfold. That's what they say, and it never happens. All they do is probably open the envelopes, dump it out, and see if they follow the instructions that some of them give. And then they go on and ask for more money a couple of days later. So, but the third thing that he talks about is the notoriety. How political parties and political people and kings and presidents want to talk to you, want to have you come to them and speak to them about matters of faith or matters of politics. And they want to sit down and they want to listen and they want to look intelligent. There's and I don't remember his name, but he did this with Obama and Kane and McCain. And I can't remember his name, and I am so sorry I can't, because it's important. But he basically did this kind of conference thing, this Christian conference, where he had them come on stage with him, and he would ask them questions, and he would, you know, as a Christian, how much power do you have where you will come, where you can call and say, hey, you know, if you don't come on my stage, it's going to look bad for you as a president, or look bad for you as a candidate. You really should come on my stage. That is a lot of power for a person of God to have. And I'm not saying that leaders of churches don't have power. You know, Pope Francis, who until, you know, the whole scandal rebroke about the priests, you know, was probably my favorite pope at that point because of his caring and understanding. I also like Pope John, but I also know the time frame he was in. It wasn't very progressive, but I liked him because he was a man of God and he was a man of love, and he stuck his neck out a lot. So I give Pope Saint John Paul II a lot of props. But, you know, Pope Francis, I really like Pope Francis. I always have liked Pope Francis for the most part because he is a man of God, but he's also a man of science. Being Pope has a lot of power. Being a cardinal has a lot of power. Being a bishop or a priest has a lot of power. Being a reverend of a small church in the middle of Iowa has a lot of power. You know, being a preacher of a megachurch has a lot of power. And it has a lot of notoriety and a lot of influence. You know, if you're Joel Osteen, you've probably talked to more than one president. You've probably or more than one congressman, or more than one senator. You know, Franklin Graham, who piggybacks on his father's much better abilities, and is much more bigoted than, you know, David Duke in some respects. Has talked to presidents, has talked to congressmen and senators, has had a prayer day on a Sunday for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is the most attacked president of all time. And it makes my head hurt even thinking about that. But it's the notoriety that they want. They want to be noticed. They want to be the honored guest at the banquet, the honored seat at a Senate hearing, or in Congress, you know, or at the inauguration. They want to be met and greeted with the word teacher, preacher, reverend, grand poobah. They want all of this. You know, they want the earthly rewards, and they're getting them. But it's not what the church, what the Bible, what everybody else preaches, because it's not what's in the Bible. You have to have some kind of some type of biblical background to be able to say this actually is the case. It's insane to think that the Bible, which talks about healing and giving to the poor and living meekly, has anything to do with this prosperity doctrine. There is not enough verses in the Bible to back that up. And I have gotten really southern, and I apologize. And don't get me wrong, I believe that if you become wealthy because of your merits and because of what you do, that doesn't make you a bad human being, doesn't make you a bad Christian. There are plenty of people who have wealth and that have wealth that are good people. Keanu Reeves comes to mind. I hear he gives a lot of money to charity. He lives in a very modest home. And there's more than one of those kind of people in the world. There are people on my side that I see that aren't, good. The Clintons, and I'm not getting all upset, and I don't want people to get upset with me. Hillary Clinton was a good candidate. She wasn't a great candidate. She was a good candidate. But she's also had a lot of money. And Bill and her, I think, were a bit out of touch as well. Don't get me wrong. It's not like Donald Trump out of touch. There was some out of touch. But that being said, and there are other people on my side that Harvey Weinstein was a liberal. And you saw what happened to him, what he did with his wealth and power. So let's, I can't say, call a spade, and that's a spade. That should be used to bury anything Harvey Weinstein ever does again. Ew. But that being said, he, so there are people on that side too that uses that power that way. But if you are a man or a woman of God, and don't get me wrong, there are women who are out there, especially the spouses of these preachers who love it just as much, who hawk oils and nostrums, like snake oil salesmen, that will heal your body. What heal? Sorry. I get upset when people talk about these healing potions, for lack of a better term, that are going to heal your body. All you need is pray. It goes back to this things about science. There are things proven to help people. Does prayer work in conjunction with science? There has been more than one study that says the people who hold on to the faith or have a positive attitude, because it's similar, that God will heal me, that God will, help me through this cancer and this chemo treatments and the radiation treatments or this surgery or whatever. If they keep a positive attitude, they tend to, and that is a positive attitude, they tend to heal faster or heal better. Are there miracles in the world? There's been stories, of people being healed when they wasn't thought it would be possible to be healed. And I do not discount miracles. I can as a Christian, that there are things that boggle scientists. People who have had late fourth stage cancer, which is pretty much a death sentence. Currently, all the cancer is gone in a couple of months. These things to me, that's a miracle. It may be a miracle of science, but it's still a miracle. Still powerful. But just to pray, just to say that I do not need these doctors do not know what they're talking about, God will heal me, because ex-reverend or ex-reverend's wife has given me this snake oil, this stuff, this stuff that they created in their bathrooms is going to heal me. I don't understand that. I can't. I have faith, but I also believe in. I also feel science would help. I would, if I'm sick and everything, and don't get me wrong, when my parents were sick, I prayed every day. I wanted them to get better. It didn't happen. We all knew the consequences of some. The cancer my mother had was inoperable, and there was no. It wasn't curable. It was treatable, but not curable, and it kills people. In about the same time frame it killed my mother. My father was supposed to have gotten better, and I'm not getting into that, but he didn't, and I prayed daily for them, and it didn't happen. And it's not because I lost my faith. I prayed, and I believed, and I still believe. But I also know that there are things that just happen. I know that the body doesn't react to certain things well, or that cancer is cancer. Cancer is a blight on nature. But I'm also realistic as a human being. I pray for miracles and I believe and I want miracles to happen. But I also think science is important. I keep catching myself from saying believing. My point is this. You can believe that God will heal you. But God also created reason and helped us come up with science. Through through letting evolution happen, and all that stuff. That we're able to reason out, okay, this is a certain kind of cancer. If we do this, it will prolong someone's life and possibly cure them of this kind of cancer. Versus, I'm just going to pray. I believe God gave us that. And to use that to sell whatever, or to tell them that they have to give you money so that they can get better and heal, is sickening. And it's depraved. And it is not Christian. There was a movie that came out, I want to say last year, I think it was. It was the Trump Doctrine, I think it was called. I apologize if I don't remember it exactly. But the first part of it is about this fireman who has PTSD and had a dream about Trump was going to become president. And he goes to therapists and stuff like that. And these therapists who have their own books on therapy, but he's a Christian and he believes, and that's fine. I do believe there are really good Christian therapists out there that are still therapists first. They are Christians, so a Christian feels more comfortable speaking about their faith, and that is fine. But there are still known sciences when it comes to therapy and stuff like that work. But what they did instead is they used this to exploit this man who has PTSD from traumatic events as a fireman. Doesn't help him, but helps themselves to become movie stars in their ministry. That is manipulation of someone who is in need. And I feel that the prosperity doctrine does that. Prosperity doctrine isn't about prosperity for the person giving the money. Prosperity doctrine is about some shady individual with certain credentials to claim to be a preacher, preying on the poor and preying on the sick and preying on the elderly to gain more wealth and more power so that they can then use it for their own machinations. whether it to be elected president, whether it to get certain things passed in Congress or the Senate, things of that nature. When you look at the Bible, and when you look at what they talk about in the Bible and how we should live as Christians, that is something that's like, well, how should we live as Christians? How should we live as Christians? Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4 clearly states that, and that's something we'll definitely, this will be a transition point for our next discussion next week. Starting on chapter 42 in Acts 2, it says, and I'm reading from the USCCB Bible, which is the Catholic Bible, because it's really the closest, because they use the Greek and Hebrew translations, so it's a lot closer as far as wording is concerned. So chapter 42 of Acts chapter 2, verse 42, I apologize. They devoted themselves to teaching of the apostles and to the communal life of breaking bread and prayers. Awe came upon everyone, and many wondered, and signs were done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their property and possessions and divide among them all according to each one's need. Every day they would devote themselves to meeting together in temple area and breaking bread in their homes. They ate their meals with exhilaration and sincerity of heart. They praised God and enjoyed the favor of all people. Every day the Lord added to their number to those who were being saved. And this is Acts chapter 4, and this is verse 32, and it's life in a Christian community. And the community of believers were all of one heart and mind, and no one claimed that any of his possessions that was his own. And they had everything in common. With great power of the apostles bore witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and gave great favor according to them. There was no needy person among them, for those who owned property or houses would sell them, bringing the proceeds to the sale, and put them at the feet of the apostles. They would distribute each according to their need. And Joseph, also named by the apostles Barnabas, which translates to son of encouragement, a Levite, and a Septic by birth, sold a piece of property that he owned, then brought the money and put it at the feet of the apostles. They had communions. They were a communion. Now, I'm admitting, it's a slightly different time, but they basically all lived together. They all worshiped together. No one had any property. They basically were communists. They worked together. I mean, stories about Paul talking, Paul, he would work to get enough money to go on the next leg of his journey or whatever, and he would spend time with the churches that he would be at, and they would offer him food and drink and a place to stay and everything else, and they would help him. They would raise money so that he could go further on in his journey. They were communists. Or they were Christians who were helping each other and helping the poor and helping the needy to make sure everybody had what they needed, that no one, it said, where was this again? It said it in chapter 2, and it said, I think it was chapter 2. Hold on one second. No, I mean in chapter, okay. Chapter 4, Acts chapter 4, I apologize. Acts chapter 4, 34. There were no needy person among them. No needy person among them. What could you do with a $6 million home? What could you do with the proceeds from 5 of the 6 jets that you own, or the airport that you own near your home that is a mansion? What could you do for the neediest person in your congregation, or the neediest person in your town, or the neediest families? What could you do for them if you did what they did here, which is to sell their own property or houses and bring the proceeds to the apostles? Bringing the proceeds to the feet of God. What could you do with that? What more could you do with that versus gathering more wealth for yourself, holding on to that wealth and buying more things of this earth? You claim to be a Christian, and as a Christian, you say that part of being a Christian is you are dead to this world, that the things of this world doesn't hold sway over you, except for the 6 jets and the Ford and the Escalade that I have, and the and the big mansion I have, and the swimming pool in my backyard, because I need to swim and relax. Those hold sway over you. Those hold sway. Not the Word of God, not being a person of God, not helping the poor as Jesus commanded. Telling other rich people it's okay to be rich because God said it was okay for me to be rich, because that's some doctrine I found on a toilet somewhere or something, because God knows this is not, the prosperity doctrine is not the teaching of God. And using it for your own gain, and then using it to prop up political figures that you sort of agree with, or will make sure that you hold on to your money a little tighter, because if someone else comes into power and starts nosing around and seeing how much you have defrauded your followers, and not being a true ministry. The word ministry means you reach out and you help people in need, both spiritually, emotionally, financially. You're reaching out to help people, and you use that to take and steal money from the sick, the elderly, and the poor who are scared and desperate, and you're telling them what they want to hear instead of preaching the Word of God. How dare you do that? How dare you? Sorry, got a little preachy there. It's a thing that triggers. I'm triggered right now, and not in the important way of it, but it is a thing that makes me angry. It's a thing that upsets me. It's a thing that boils me as a Christian. I have never understood how people could claim to be a Christian and want more wealth. I understand about living okay, and I understand about not worrying about money and worrying about finances. That's different than this greed, and it makes me angry. And that's why I wanted to talk about this. And I'm pretty sure if September was here, she would tell me to calm the fuck down. I'm going to calm down. We're going to end tonight's show. So, as always, we have carrot and sticks. So, the stick tonight is going to our good senator just south of the border of us and cheery old South Carolina, which my mother always used to say whenever we'd had to cross the state line. Ooh, we're in South Carolina 400 years and absolutely no progress. Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, for ripping up the rules of governance to basically make sure that kids are still are locked up in cages forever. Wow, that's Lindsey, you claim to be a Christian and you believe in locking kids up in cages. You claim to be a friend of Israel. Israel! Jews! Cages! You're an idiot! I'm sorry, the Jews were white. Yes, I'm also calling Lindsey Graham. From the state of South Carolina, until recently, still flew the Confederate flag on the Capitol's grounds. A racist. I'm not shocked. So he gets a stick. And I'll leave it at that. Carrot goes to someone I admire because I'm a huge professional wrestling fan. And I have been for years, ever since I was a kid. This goes to Shane Helms. You may know him as Hurricane Helms. Or, you know, or some of his many other personas. But Shane Helms also works for the WWE, which is very conservative and still has Trump in their Hall of Fame. Can't have Pete Rose in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but we have Donald Trump in the WWE Wrestling Hall of Fame. Don't ask questions, Daniel. You're getting off track. Shane Helms, who works for the WWE, and is Lyndon McMahon, has ran for senator a couple of times, worked in the Trump organization as a cabinet position. He's very outspoken against the GOP and against the president. I mean, like, he's really liberal. I'm surprised, you know, and he's from North Carolina as well. He's a North Carolina boy as well. And you're seeing a lot of people my age, a lot of Gen Xers and younger, becoming more and more liberal in this state. And I think that's going to help a great deal, because education is key. And I think we're trying to educate, and he does a great job of educating and mocking, you know, stupid things the GOP and Trump does. And you can follow him on Twitter at Shane Helms COM. It's no dot. I keep wanting to say dot because it's ShaneHelmsCOM, and that's on Twitter. You can follow him, and he's very funny, very intelligent. He'll talk about wrestling sometimes if you're into wrestling, but he also talks about politics and social commentary as well. And he's a very good person to follow, and more people should follow him. And I just wanted to give him a carrot for always being very on point, especially when it comes to Trump lately. He's been very on point. So I wanted to give a shout out to someone I admire, and someone who in the professional business, in the business he is a more conservative leaning business, and how he puts it, people know who he is, and he speaks out, and he doesn't care. And people who heckle him or say things, he just obliterates them because he's as smart as, to quote another wrestling announcer this time, as smart as a whip. So you know, I appreciate that. Thank you for joining Heresy and Hearsay. I'm Reverend Barney, and you can follow me on Twitter at Seth Roth II. You can also follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, podcast, as well as our website. Just Google us. Yeah. Don't forget our Patreon page, where $2 a month can help this going, and that's a Patreon /heresy, patreon.com/heresy and hearsay. Please, if you can't donate, if you can't give us any money, I understand. Please, I want to see this channel grow, both on the YouTube as well as our podcast. So please share it with your friends. Share it with people who of like mind about politics, because part of politics is religion. You know, people say you shouldn't talk about sport, as you shouldn't talk about religion or politics in a bar. And unfortunately, religion and politics are very well tied, especially in the opposition party that I'm a part of, which is I'm a liberal. And the GOP has been using religion to beat up liberals, and it's time that we take that back. It's time that we take faiths back, so that they can't be used for hate when they're not a hateful faith. The people who follow them are hateful. So if you can't donate, please share, or please expand us. Please tell your friends, tell your family, tell your worst enemies about us. You know, I don't mind the occasional troll. They're fun. I also want to give a quick shout out before I finish my little thing here. I also want to give a quick shout out to those who comment on the YouTube page and those who ask questions on when we do our Twitch feed. The legitimate questions, the trolls, you know, you can just stop trolling. But whatever, if you're going to be trolls, you know, we'll just feed you to the Billy Goat Gruff. But I want to thank those who comment. I do read the comments. I may not comment all the time, but I do read the comments, and I appreciate them. You can follow my partner, September. You can follow her on Twitch and Twitter at 9of12. That's at NINEOF 12. And and you can also hear her on the Geek Grills and Trust Your Podcast. Trust Your Cape Podcast. You know, as many times as I said it by myself now, I should be able to say that properly. Trust Your Cape Podcast. And I want to thank you again for listening to this very rambly podcast tonight, and I apologize for that. But most of all, bless your hearts.